I'm the laziest writer, and I'm about to jump into the introduction. So before that, let me give you a spoiler warning for Fallout 3, New Vegas, and 4, and I guess for Katherine Mansfield's short story The Garden Party. Anyway, Mansfield's story is, at the surface level, about the events surrounding a party thrown by a wealthy family who are extremely out of touch. The protagonist is Laura, one of the daughters of the family, who wishes she were able to understand and even fit in with the working class people that serve her, but is ultimately unable to interact appropriately with the struggles of a less privileged life. When she discovers that a driver has died on the morning of the party, she cannot stand the thought of celebrating after a man has been killed, and tells her sister Josie that they must stop everything, determined to prevent the insensitivity that is about to take place. Published in 1922, the entire text sits in the shadow of the devastation of the First World War, and many of its themes are applicable to a world devastated by 4 years of mechanized warfare on a scale never before seen. Europe was in ruins, and everything was different now. Women had flooded into the workplace to fill the void of the conscripts and were gaining suffrage unlike ever before. The populace had been annihilated, particularly along certain demographic lines, meaning that death was now a young man's game, and the remains of generations were hollowed out, withered, and dilapidated. It was even believed that the sheer volume of gunfire had caused the ceaseless rainfall that drowned the men in the mud, and fostered such festering conditions as trench foot and the 1918 influenza pandemic that took the lives of between 17 and 100 million people. A core idea of Laura's desire to stop everything and mourn the fallen draws from this fact, as everything is so fundamentally corrupted by the death that has taken place that any continuance would be disastrous. The concept is reminiscent of Derrida's musings on logocentrism, and more specifically, phonocentrism, which, to give a short version, dictate that language has lost its meaning, and that the most meaningful words, texts, and moments all work around the limits of our logical conceptions, and make the limits of our language tremble. Language has been so thoroughly debased that meaning can only be found in the experimental use of language that usurps those logical concepts, and as such, Derrida states that our world and our thinking are so flawed that we must change everything. Let us begin again. So how do these quotes relate to a satirical series about surviving in a very American nuclear wasteland? Well, surprisingly closely. Firstly, I think it's pretty obvious which event serves to reflect the First World War and the inherent ruination of the entire world, so I won't be dwelling too significantly on that, other than to point out that it has changed the very meaning of humanity by introducing ghouls, feral ghouls, super mutants, nightkin, and synths, among other things. Moving on, in each of Bethesda's Fallout games, yes, New Vegas counts because they published it, and no, I won't be talking about that. There are remnants of the old world that clash with what it has become, and the symbols of evil within the wasteland usually either originate or are derived from pre-war ideas and organisations. Sure, Deathclaws can be pretty terrifying, but the true antagonists are Vault-Tec, Shaun and the Institute, or the Enclave, or Mr. House and Caesar's Legion, all of which represent, or at least attempt to represent, the continued existence of an ideal in a much changed world. All in all, each of those remnants that I mentioned seems indicative of a separate idea about the need to stop everything and begin again. So let's get started. I'm going to be really awkward and do these in the worst possible order, which means we're starting with 2010's Fallout New Vegas, developed by Obsidian Entertainment and standing out as my personal favourite in the series. I've already mentioned Mr. House, the preserved pre-war casino owner who has saved and monetized the gambling capital of America, as well as Caesar's Legion, those fascistic living history nerds who dress like it's AD 34 and crucify people for fun, I guess. However, there's a bigger force here, and that's the NCR, or New California Republic, a post-war nation that seeks to impose the old world upon the American wasteland. They may seem like the more morally outstanding faction of the three, and in some senses they are. Don't get me wrong, they're pretty awful, but when the opposition is torturing people to death for being unclean, you'll more than likely be the better of the two. Yet they're also extremely flawed, forcing everybody to submit to their way of government and really struggling in their war against those aforementioned edgy teenage LARPers. Their way of life simply isn't sustainable in this world, and winning the second Battle of Hoover Dam, that big fight at the end of the game, requires the help of the protagonist, known as the Courier, who is a true wastelander, someone who in no way follows their philosophies and who could turn against them at any moment.
I could, and I might. I probably will.
Even if the NCR win their war, their ideology has been lost, succumbing to the brutal new way of the wastes. And they're not the only ones. Mr. House, at first glance, is doing pretty well when the Courier shows up. He's in control of New Vegas, having saved it from nuclear annihilation back in 2077, and is still alive in 2281 thanks to marvels of technology. And money. He has preserved the world that he now controls, his robots lining the streets and everyone within the strip seemingly submitting to his will. Yet he refuses to admit that the world has changed and appears to cling desperately to days gone by and the rampant predatory and consumerist world of Vegas as it is today, or as it was 200 years before the events of the game. When you first see the Lucky 38 standing out in the distance before you make it to New Vegas, it feels surreal to see lights and what looks like a semblance of functioning society defying the wasteland. But what he has created is a beacon of inequality, celebrating his success and his success alone. Through preserving the old ways, he has not saved the Mojave as he would have you believe, but has instead constructed a series of violent, inescapable slums where gangs go to war in the streets, and those in need are dependent upon charity and the sparse kindness of strangers. Even within the coveted, exclusive environment of the Strip, which should have more than enough security to avoid trouble, we see Gomorrah, at which he is disgusted, the White Glove Society, who cannibalize other survivors, and the Tops, whose leader, Benny, betrays Mr. House. As Benny himself says, even within this utopia that House believes he has built, his ideals are falling victim to the rebellious, sinful new way. Instead of paradise, he has perpetuated pandemonium, and has lost control of everything beyond his front door. And we ourselves had the option to bring that dystopia much, much closer. House has diabolically disrupted the universe's attempt to stop everything, refusing to let us begin again, and thus his vision has been punished accordingly. Fallout 4 is a good game. Maybe I'll make a video on that someday. But more to the point, it is absolutely full of factions who cling to the past and end up worse off for it. In fact, every one of the game's major factions is either rooted in, or simply a continuation of, a pre-war entity, and the architecture, monuments, and themes throughout all bring us back to the history of American independence and the founding of the United States. This isn't necessarily new, as we see the sites of Washington in Fallout 3, and areas like the Strip, Rivet City, Megaton, Diamond City, and Good Neighbor all exist thanks to the preservation of objects or places that existed before the bombs blew the rest of it to smithereens. But in Fallout 4, this is emphasized by the most explicit example yet of history repeating itself. Not only do we have the Minutemen and the railroad literally residing beneath the Old North Church, but also the robots clinging to their jingoistic pre-war sentiments, and the protagonists born and raised before the war began, on a quest to reconnect with their family life from 210 years ago. What they find is a wasteland that deeply misunderstands the past that it so desperately clings to, worshipping the old despite it being a cause of all of their woes. The irradiation and subsequent monsters and anti-Ghoul prejudices, the cruel Vault-Tec experiments that exploit their unknowing victims, the robots that hunt every passerby with inhuman power and determination, and the hardships of defending each tiny farm from the dangers of the wasteland. All of these problems stem from the culmination of a world that they wish to perpetuate once more. In Diamond City, they continue to paint the wall the same green colour as the green monster at Fenway Park, maintaining its iconic facade in some ritualistic preservation of a shrine to the old world. Even more bizarrely, we see the continued development of the Children of Atom, religious zealots who worship the bombs for creating the irradiated world that they now occupy. And whilst this seemingly contradicts the notion of preserving the old, they are still praising the old world for its most destructive tendencies, and the unfathomably difficult life that it has bestowed upon them. Mo, the shopkeeper in Diamond City who sells baseball bats, which he calls swatters, is indicative of the biggest problem plaguing the people of the Commonwealth. He believes that baseball was a game in which the teams would beat one another to death with the instruments at hand, and if you try to correct him, will tell you that he prefers his version, refusing to listen to reason or to accept this new information about the nature of the game. The Commonwealth's greatest enemy isn't the Institute, or the super mutants, but their inability to grasp the world of their predecessors. They will never learn from the mistakes of the past, because they have misinterpreted them at their core. They had a chance to rebuild and renew, to begin again when the world came crashing down, stopping everything in its tracks. But instead, they linger, lost, squandering that opportunity as they look to a time of comfort and suburban luxury, a time that is long gone and can never return, to save them from the pain of the present. So, right off the bat, Fallout 3 employs its retro-futurist style to demonstrate a world that is struggling to accept its transition into something vehemently, even violently different. Even ignoring the tunnel snakes, what's the first place that we encounter upon escaping the vault with nothing but our lives and a pretty shocking kill count for a 19-year-old? Megaton, an entire community built around an atomic bomb that could kind of just go off at any minute. You can even arm it yourself if you want to. Side note, I love how other games always seem to have a clear karma morality system, whereby being nice inevitably results in the best possible outcome, and then you get Fallout 3, where nuking a small town who never really did anything wrong gets you the fanciest home that the wasteland has to offer, and where, 90 minutes into my good guy run, I'd already eaten significant amounts of human meat, and taken up a role as a slaver. Anyway, Megaton, Rivet City, and the countless examples of people and mutants taking up residence in the crumbling landmarks of Washington DC are all heavily indicative of a failure to begin again. Even the feral ghouls are seemingly drawn to the cultural cornerstones of the city, or the subway tunnels that those older ghouls presumably used in their everyday commutes before the bombs dropped, reminiscent of the zombies from Dawn of the Dead, returning to their church of American consumerism. It's perhaps indicative of just how pessimistic this view of the post-apocalypse can be, that even in a place that was presumably hit hardest, and which should have evaporated under the collapse of the country that once gave it all of its power, there survives, in fact thrives, the very set of systems that the entire game is satirizing. Just look at the United States government's executive branch, preserved even when its leader exists as nothing more than a voice transmitting over a much maligned radio broadcast. Look at how the ideological talons of the evil Vault-Tec refuse to unhook themselves even from those that the shadowy organisation has been torturing for the past 200 years. People are killing their neighbours, destroying communities, and electing survivors to be executed at the behest of the beliefs of those that died centuries beforehand, in the name of those very same goals. We see the blindness of those beliefs and their interactions with others as Liberty Prime, which is considered a force against communism, an ideological relic of the war that destroyed human civilization back in 2077, is deployed to fight against two enemies, the supposed remnants of the US government in Fallout 3, and the corporate enemy of the Institute in Fallout 4, hardly bastions of the communism that it's supposedly there to combat. It fights avidly as we fight rabidly against the rivals that are deemed supportive of economic systems that haven't existed en masse in over 2 centuries. There is no war, there is no China, and there's certainly no United States, but even in the dust and echoes there remain memories, reverberations, of what once was. I think that's why it's so important that, even though the world of Fallout started deviating from our own in the past, the apocalypse doesn't come about until 55 years from our current existence in 2022. Because above all else, it's a warning. The poisonous attitudes of those who led the world headfirst into nuclear oblivion have not waned, and are arguably here for good, even with how fundamentally different the wasteland is to what came beforehand. We cannot continue to take these attitudes, because doing so will get us all killed, and will get our descendants killed too. And their descendants, if they have any, will face the same problems as we do today. We must stop everything, not in the nuclear sense, but in terms of our progression towards that end, because even if humanity survives the apocalypse, that will be a problem in and of itself. Even with some great reset, we will never truly begin again. So maybe let's take our foot off the pedal with the hostility, right? I started writing this video in like November. I can't believe that the day I get back to writing it and finishing it is the day that Putin... You know what? Let's not. Anyway, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. It really means a lot, and I'm so glad to be able to try new things with all of my videos this year. If you had any thoughts on the video, please do leave a comment, as I love to see what people think. And of course, if you enjoyed watching this and would like to see some more, you know what to do. So, thanks again, and I will hopefully see you next time.